Welcome back, everyone, to our monthly tech town hall discussion here with PTZOptics and HuddleCam HD. As always, my name is William Goldie, your host here to talk about all things tech within the Pro AV broadcast live streaming world. Now, today, you'll notice I got my t-shirt on. It is almost summer. The summer vibes are in full effect, which means it is education install season. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, if you've already made your purchases and you're going into your education install these months, we just want to talk about some systems that we've worked with in the past, maybe give you a little bit of inspiration to help troubleshoot the problems that you're solving in your project. And as always, we have Stephen and Matt Davis with us today. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Doing great.
I don't know, Matt. We can't compete with that energy that Will's got there. And I think I kind of feel
this is what happens when the flowers pop and the sun comes up. It's the end of the dark and gray season here in the Northeast, and it is awesome to be here.
Yeah, I mean, you got that sunny shirt on, and meanwhile, here we are still in our winter blacks, you know?
Gentlemen, it is the time for color. I even got khakis on. Yeah, taking it to 11. But seriously, we are here to talk about education. Now, Stephen, I know that you've done work with a lot of schools in the past. Now, you have a couple of things to show us here, and we'll jump into that in a minute. But just talking about education, there are so many different levels that we can start from where, you know, it could go from a basic one camera, one mic system, all the way up to multi-camera, multi-systems, pulling in media from everywhere, all over the place. So this is a topic that has 1,000 different rabbit holes, but we're going to kind of stick to the core here. So with that, I'll kind of hand it over to you guys. I know we have a little bit of a presentation again, then we'll jump into the questions afterwards as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I was talking with Matt as we got involved during the pandemic with some schools looking to utilize our cameras. And Matt, I mean, it was just a huge undertaking in the sense of they didn't know what they needed. They didn't know what they wanted. And you're kind of going in blind there and trying to make something of virtually nothing. And I'm going to show that here in a little bit. But you are a valid resources because now you got to go in and you got to deal with networks and trying to figure out how you're going to make this stuff work on an already locked down network, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of options. And I think as we explore your video, you know, we're going to get some pretty good opportunities to explore when is the right use case for some of these options that are available to you.
So that's one thing I would say to some folks out there. If you're going into a school, don't just assume that this is what they need. You need to go in and, like I did, and I went in, I looked at the area that they'd be utilizing. Also find out if this is a permanent installation, because some of the places that I had to go into the school, they want to be able to move this around, not just keep it stationary. And at the end of every year, the school and the IT guys make them tear down everything. So nothing could be left permanently installed. So it had to be something that they could tear down and also set up. So you're also customizing a setup or a system, Matt, that's easy enough that they could set up, but complex enough to get that professional vibe to it.
Well, and I think, you know, some of these advances in technology have made that concept actually doable. You know, it used to be really, really tough to achieve that, but I think in some of the videos you're going to highlight in a little bit, we're going to see how flexible modern solutions are at being able to achieve this. You know, IP video.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of these pictures. We'll start out with some of these pictures that I have here. As you can see here, this is the broadcast teacher. This was pre-pandemic, or right after the schools were told that they couldn't have students in class. Everybody was doing school remote. You can see I'm training her on our G3, and she's learning that. At the time we were using some different software. We had wirecast going on. They're now using vmix with it. They started out and they had this really big green screen, which posed a lot of problems, Matt, because you can see there's a lot of it's set up like a curtain, right? So there's a lot of shadowing on that.
I mean, green screens are always seem like a great idea, and then you start to play with them, and you realize how difficult it is to really make that look professional.
And they did it for a couple weeks, and I'm like, look, guys, you're. I had to bring in those studio lights those were some of my old studio lights that I donated to them. But we had to move that green screen since it was on like a curtain rod. We could kind of slide it back, and I had given the suggestion of the kids that do artwork that are really good in the school to put that up on the back wall to showcase it on the announcements. They had a really nice desk, and the teacher there, again, she was working with a skeleton crew because nobody was really allowed into the school. I think they had to be under 8 people in a classroom. So I was working with some different students almost every day. Here she's going through, starting the cameras up, getting things going. Once things started to turn around, okay, once students were allowed to come back, even partially, they called it that hybrid where they were in person, but they were also remote a couple times. This is kind of the setup that they started to use with the green screen. You can see a lot of the students um, are running different things. They had like an open source teleprompter that they were using that was browser based, and then they had 2 guys doing the actual production. One guy was running the switching system. The other guy was calling up presets on the joystick and moving the shots. And then we had what we were calling the audio engineer to make sure that the audio was getting out there. And they would rotate to different people every day. So somebody else would get to switch. Somebody else would get to, uh, whatever, produce. So that was really ideal. The hardest part, as you'll see, is keeping their attention, right? Because a lot of them, they want to do crazy stuff. But I had a buddy of mine that you'll see here in the picture. He went in and he was helping me with them as well, instruct them on what to do and how to do it within with the production and stuff. So as the pandemic wore on, um, they were a bunch of characters, though. I will say that they had a lot of machines there, but they enjoyed it thoroughly, as you can tell. They had a good time producing with it, and by the time it was all said and done, um, they were producing stuff. They liked the wall. They were like, yeah, the green screen looks kind of trashy, so they didn't really want to do that. But I want to draw attention to this if we can. This is their setup. They have 2 PTZOptics 20X cameras with tally lights, and they're on a stand mat that basically has a clamp that clamps to the table.
Oh, nice.
And it has adjustability, so it could actually go up another 15 inches if we wanted it to
Oh, wow.
on that. It's a telescoping pole. I think I picked them up for like $20 a piece when I donated them there, and I had them set because they have to be able to remove them. Like they can't. Of course, I wanted to hang them from the ceiling, and she's like, "No, we can't do that." Um, But that other monitor that's in the middle, that was actually used as a teleprompter, and there's some open source web-based teleprompting software that they would use. So no matter what camera they were looking at, it would actually look like they were looking at the camera.
Oh, and this is where your point of, sometimes you got to get a little bit of creative here.
Yep.
This is a prime example of getting creative with the resources they already had to make this work.
And we did have the tally lights on, so they had both options. So they could see what camera was live. Then they also had the teleprompter. But the biggest thing was trying to get the joystick to talk to the cameras. And you go into a school, it's a closed network. The IT director is not very familiar with how networks for video need to work and what things need to be open, because his main goal is just to keep traffic flowing on the internet and keeping kids out of stuff they shouldn't be in. That's when I contacted you and I said, hey, can we just build a network within it? Is it going to affect? Because I had never been into a school to do something like that. And you were basically like, yeah, just create another network and
Yeah.
call it a day, right?
Yeah. Because, at that point, if you build the network into your own setup, you can be in control of it. Whether you're attaching it to their network, whether you're attaching it to other equipment like a hotspot, it starts to give you flexibility on your production. And that, if you think the area you're operating in might be questionable, well, you can look at alternatives. But if you have that network built in, you have all of these options at your fingertips.
Yeah, and it worked without any issues. I got like a nice Linksys router. I got a PoE switch. We plugged everything in, and as you can see, it was controllable. But again, it couldn't interfere with the network. So that's one of the things you definitely want to check in with the school to make sure that they're okay with it, and let them know that this is not going to access the internet unless the school wants them to. This is mainly just to make the IPs talk to each other, creating just a small little, I guess you could call it a subnet
Yeah,
or a
yeah.
subnetwork.
Yeah, exactly. I would totally go with the sub network there. And I just want to mention it because it's always that backup option. Sometimes you might not have the option to pump this out live. So always remember, most of the software out there allows you to record, record, record. You can always upload it later. There's ways to make this stuff work.
So one of the next things that we actually did was we were tasked with doing graduation. So we were at a auditorium where they actually had a house um, sound engineer who basically gave us a USB cable. We plugged it into our vmix system, and he managed all the audio. And my buddy that you had seen in the other video, he was sitting there using our Superjoy out to. He had a multi-view from vmix, but then he also had a little monitor that he could fine-tune if something was overshooting in the camera. He could adjust that. You guys in the previous Tech Town Hall saw my portable rig, so I don't even need to go through that. But we were tasked to come in here and stream this live using live view. We had it inside the rack there to do graduation, because at that point in time, Matt, we didn't know if in person was coming back. They just started getting a little bit lenient on how many. I think they could have, like, in a facility like this that would normally hold 2,000 people. I think they could have 200 people at the time. So, grandma and grandpa still weren't feeling safe enough to be out there. We had an option for them, and you can see I'm pointing. We had a 20x up there in the rafters, and another 20x up there. You can kind of see where nobody's sitting. It really gave us the opportunity to get the handshakes as the kids came across the stage on either side when they shook the hands. And then we got 30Xs in the back here that we set up just to get that front on stage presence of the speaking and things like that. So it really gave us um, a lot of different vantage points when it came to uh, streaming this live and recording it. And they were really impressed. So they wanted something like that to be able to shoot when we were done. And it was two guys. We just ran everything, and did it. And we also, Matt, we did a play, and I have a little EPTZ there on those stools with a slide. That was our dump camera. I like to call it a dump camera when you got to go to a camera quick. The EPTZ is on the slide. 220Xs down there, and this is the first time that we did it with a live band. It was a musical, and they had no idea. They didn't have anything prepared for microphones or anything. So I fortunately had some wireless microphones that I could set up to do that.
Well, so there's a really interesting aspect, I think, that you mentioned, especially with the graduation to me. So a lot of people, when they're trying to bring these in, they were just trying to replace what they used to do.
Yes.
So, like you said, a lot of the times that's not always the best angle. Maybe you've got one camera operator that you'd hired. Um, so this gets really neat. Of now you've actually got the flexibility to say, "Hey, how can I make a better production? How can I show these things I've never been able to show before?" And your camera placement there, I thought, was just beautiful. You were actually able to see the moments as they're happening, and not have things obscured or have this tiny little individual you're not really seeing that's far in the distance. So yeah, it's just one of those. It's neat to see how you can create better content with this flexibility.
And if anybody wants to see the actual graduation, it should be up on the Hubbard, Ohio High School YouTube page, so you can actually see the production that we did. For legalities and things like that, I can't really just, share some of that stuff. But I never really got the permission from the parents, but they were trying to sell that also, so I didn't want to, just be like, "Here, you can have it for free," when they're trying to raise money for boosters and stuff. So, we were doing some play, and like you said, was camera placement was key, and that's something you want to keep in mind. Again, I did a play at another high school that they brought us in. There was nobody that was allowed in there at all. So it was me, the director, and another buddy of mine where he was switching the camera, he was controlling the cameras with the Super Joy, and he was also manning the audio. As you can see, he has an iPad right there that he's controlling all the audio. It's a digital board, so he was not only making sure that everything was working on their lavalier mics, but then we also had his better view. But there we had the 30Xs because, again, nobody was allowed to be there. So we had two 30Xs out in the crowd where the crowd would be. And then up on stage, as you're going to see here in a few seconds, in between the curtains, we actually put the 20Xs, which gave us a really good vantage point where we didn't get the camera inside of the shot. And you can also see I boom mic'd some room mics, wireless mics and wired mic, so we could get some of that ambience and mix it together with the lavalier so it didn't sound like a studio recording. We wanted the thumping of them running across the stage. I'm just showing here like kind of the back, but there's kind of the stage setup with it. And then I'll show you some clips. This is the actual production, and we kind of mixed it, like I like to say, like a Nickelodeon show, right? We kind of did it where it was like a bunch of kids, with a lot of fast cutting and editing and switching, and he even did some follows on this, which I thought was pretty good with considering what we had to do. There was a lot of fast paced action in this, so certain scenes and whatnot we had to be switching. I'll skip through here a little bit. But it was interesting because I had never done something like that with these types of cameras where you had to be in specific positions, Matt, so you could get the facial reactions without them knowing where the cameras are at.
Oh, you mean a play? You want to see what's going on with the people's faces? Yeah, I think this is a good idea.
So that was something that we had to do. And also there was a couple scenes where kids were getting tackled. So that's the other thing, making sure that cameras aren't in the way of somebody getting tackled or in the way of other things. So again, with what we had, the parents were thrilled. They were able to make some money on this for the booster clubs, which was really good. But again, I can't stress enough, you need to get to that facility, wherever it's going to be, to see what, because the school's going to tell you one thing that they want or they need, but until you get in there, you might realize like, hey, they could have just got a simple track light and they would have been, at the time we didn't have it yet, but they would have been set. So that was one thing that I learned through all of this, was going there, seeing it in person, seeing what we could use, what we couldn't use based on the need, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of our excursion into that. Yeah.
Did
So
you have a chance to like chat with like the play as an example? Whoever was in charge of the play. So beyond just seeing the facility, were you able to talk with them a little bit about how they envisioned the performance, so you could cater around that?
yeah, so we did get to talk to them, and they were pretty much like, "You're the experts. You tell us what we need." And so that was kind of not helpful, but it was helpful. And
Yeah.
I said, if you had to, because I had never seen the play before, I'll be quite honest. Um, I had said to him, "Well, what do you envision? Is this play a comedy? Is it a serious drama?" I said, "What is it?" And they said, "Oh no, it's a comedy." I said, "So you want a lot of close-ups because of facial reactions and things like that?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of silly faces. There's some tackling going on and stuff." And I'm like, "Okay, now I know what I need and kind of where to go with that." And that was also the place, if you remember on a previous Tech Town Hall, I had mentioned about that was the place that blew up my sound card. So that was something that you want to keep in mind when you go into a place like that. Know that you're talking to somebody that knows audio. Otherwise, you're going to be dead in the water before you start. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
When
but
in doubt, check both sides of the cable.
yeah, but that did help, talking to people. And then recently, I started working with the local school. They want to, since the pandemic, nobody wants to go to these monthly meetings anymore. So now they want to do it by live streaming it.
Makes sense.
So again, had to go look at the conference room that they're wanting to do it. Had to get a feel for how the conference goes or how the meeting goes, so we could. I talked with you on the phone about it, about putting a camera here, putting a camera there. That was that was something that I think people just off the cuff, because they said, oh, somebody said we could just use something like this. And I'm like, that's not going to work. It's not for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of people just want to throw a tiny little webcam at bigger problems, and it's like,
Exactly.
this is not going to give you what you want in the end.
So that was something I think I learned through this whole process is ask too many questions. If you're out there and you're wanting to work with a school, if you're trying to do this as a business, ask too many questions. There's no such thing, because when you can go in there and wow them like we did with the graduation, and we can go in there and wow them and create a video that these kids will have for their lifetime, that they also made some money off of it for their boosters and fundraisers, that is where you did it right. And so,
Yeah.
We went in there. It was part of a learning experience for me. We donated our time. In fact, I had to tear everything down and go back the next day. But you know what? It was, the kids were like, we can do it better. So I was like, hey, I'm not going to fault them. If they think they can do it better, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow and we're going to do it again. So
Yeah. Well, hey, they spoke up.
that's right.
Yeah, they asked the question too.
So I would say to anybody out there, if you're doing that, don't just say, oh, well, you need this type of Zoom, you need this. Go in there, look at the facility, see what type of camera that they need, and see what kind of setup you need, and always ask who's doing audio. Always ask that. Everybody forgets that. They want the video, but they forget the audio.
And on
So
the note, if you can't visit right away,
yes,
get somebody to get a video of it at least for you with a cell phone. You at least want to see what you're getting into so you can make those right recommendations.
just about all these phones have video phone calls, and that's exactly what I did in the one place. So it's now, we did the FaceTime, walked around, saw the place. I'm like, okay, I know what I need. And he'd be like, well, how much Ethernet cable do you think you're going to need? And I'm like, I don't know, 300-400 foot, because he makes his own cables. And so we were able to do that. And again, we were able to do it with PoE. Worked beautiful. Just plug it in, set it, and forget it. Especially, I mean, you saw how far up in the rafters we had to put that for the graduation. So you don't want to be looking for power. You don't want to be looking for, just run an Ethernet cable.
I mean, you're already dealing with having to deal with an Ethernet cable. Anything extra just adds to the whole problem.
Exactly. So, Will, that was pretty much the presentation, if you want to call it that. So I don't know if you have any questions, or if our audience has any questions that they want to ask or want us to elaborate more on. But I'm going to kind of send it back to you in the studio here.
Perfect. No, thanks, gents. That was awesome. And like I said in my intro, I think you touched on one of the interesting things when we're talking about EDU or schools in general, and it could be K through 12, all the way on up through universities and global organizations at that level. Is when you're talking to a school, there's so many different things you could do, right? Because it could be graduations, it could be the theater department, it could even be a live broadcasting curriculum. So in my personal experience in my high school, we had our morning show where we did a closed loop television production every morning of the school announcements, and that was part of the school curriculum. So these systems aren't necessarily even dedicated just to the advancement of learning and being in a classroom or a remote classroom, but it could also be its curriculum in and of itself. You could actually learn by doing, and you did touch on that. And then there's also the other side of this too, is sports. We have a lot of junior colleges using our systems for sports production, be it basketball, volleyball, even outside. We have baseball fields with PTZOptics equipment all over the world using it. So yeah, I mean that was just one little facet, but I do want to kind of go back to some of the key points now. When we're talking about being a reseller and going to these environments, I think the key, and I'll ask you, what is your best piece of advice, but I think I already know the answer to it, is get a sense of what the school actually is and what they're actually looking for. Because a school administrator will write you an email and say, hey, I want this. And then you go and you visit and you explore a little bit more and you go, no, you don't. You want that. So on that, outside of that, can you think of any other like key pointers for resellers or engineers or anybody going into schools? What are like your bullet point steps that you can think of?
For me, and I don't know, Matt he can add into this, but I think that what I've learned is you want all parties involved in this to be at the meeting when you show up there to find out what they want. Because as you pointed out, Will, the drama teacher or the broadcasting teacher, whatever it is going to want one thing. The superintendent is going to want another thing. The principal is going to want another thing. And of course, your students are going to want something else. So it's very ideal, in my opinion, to take those notes and try to figure out, because you're not going to make everybody happy. You need to find out where that happy medium is to find out, okay, what do we really need here? I think that's what's going to help you going into that.
Well, I actually do. I was just thinking about this, and we made these actually for our sales teams. They're not yet publicly available, but we will have them distributed to anybody that needs them, should they need an extra resource. But one thing we were thinking about is, on top of discovery, also being armed with a good, better, best solution set is always very helpful. It's always very key to alleviate some sales friction. So you could go in with this idea of having, a basic lecture capture system here. One camera, one computer, back to your network. It can access the internet, and that could be used for Zoom, GoToMeeting, Skype, etc. But then also moving forward to larger systems that may involve some more production equipment, like an Epiphan Pearl Nano, a computer, and a couple of more cameras, and then even moving up to like a best solution. This would be almost like a full production environment that you could apply to graduations. Like your mobile rig is a perfect example, Stephen, that we went over a couple months ago. But that could also be applied to sports, that could be applied to graduations, and that could even be applied in the classroom, and you could get students to do a lot of this production. It adds another level of education for them. So we do have these good, better, best kind of solution sets in mind. And if you're going out into the wild, or if you yourself are an IT administrator at a school, you can start to think about these, because you might need to deploy different spaces at different times. So just having that in your back pocket is probably a good idea as well. So you did kind of mention it, and you touched on it, Matt, at the beginning of the presentation, but I have this idea of like slim and fast. Now, my morning announcement room that we built back in the day was tungsten lights and big cameras and teleprompters and all this. And looking at Steven's video, it doesn't take much. And it goes back to that idea of like the basics of what is a studio and what you can accomplish with it. So what are some of the like specific technologies that you love that are making these systems slim and fast?
I mean, the biggest one is just the transition to IP video. From enabling software-based switching that's more affordable and flexible. Sometimes even free options exist for it. I think that is probably the largest thing changing what's occurring in the production market at the moment, especially when you're looking at schools. And like Steven said, sometimes where they have to tear these things apart. If you were still doing traditional control cabling, SDI cabling, power cabling, this gets to be a very heavy thing to lug around and move, to set up, to disassemble. So I couldn't lean heavy enough on IP video changing how this is all working. Beyond that, the affordability of lights that can make you look good. You no longer need to spend a fortune. You can go pick up some pretty inexpensive solutions that really do everything you need to step your game up, so that you really are making that best presentation. Are you going to look as good as maybe an ABC Studios? Probably not, but you're going to look really, really good compared to everyone else out there that is not bothering to add any lighting to their scenario. So yeah, really, computers, IP video, and good lighting. They're all getting affordable and easy to kind of add on to your production.
Yeah, it's almost as if at this point, given the way we communicate globally now, right? I remember the book "The World is Flat," and that's not a flat Earth statement. That's a ease of communication statement. It's almost at this point like, why not have a studio in your school? Or if you are involved in a school district, maybe not as an administrator, but it's just a school district you live near, and you're interested in this type of stuff, why not approach that school about these things? Because it's a necessary technology, I think, moving forward in terms of like teaching kids about virtual communication and the tools that they need to do it, right?
Stephen hit on a good point earlier, which was, going in to help understand what they really need. If you want to make a long-term client who's going to be saying, hey, you want to do the same thing, go talk to these guys. Don't just give them some random camera or what they came in, requesting. Spend that time to understand what they're trying to achieve. And I'm sure if you make that right recommendation or even something they can grow with, they're going to keep coming back to you for more and more solutions. Because you're helping them achieve what they need, and nothing is better than that. Getting something generic just never quite feels right.
When you're talking to these schools or any client, really, it doesn't have to be an education client, it could be any client. What are some things that you can think of to kind of help people future-proof these systems? Because again, like these good, better, best solutions that we show, they almost seem you can always add things into them, right? But having that core group of products that allows you to quote unquote future-proof a system. Is there anything that pops to mind when you're thinking about that?
I mean, two things, at least for me. Uh, the network equipment you buy. So never just buy what gets you by. If you want to plan for the future, buy something that's going to accommodate about 60% growth, is the right way to look at it. So if you look at X amount of cameras, plan for there potentially to be 60% more of that in the long run. If there's certain speeds that you need, plan to accommodate a lot more data, 60% more data than you're currently planning against. Whether that means you need a 1 gig switch, a 2.5 gig switch, a 10 gig switch, it's going to save you a lot of heartache down the road. Not that you can't upgrade it later, but if you're actually trying to future proof, it's a really easy way to kind of not have to worry about that. And then the only other piece in the modern era, I would say, is a good PC, a really good PC, so that you can push it for as long as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with Matt on that because everybody hears the word future proof. There's really, I mean, if we're all going to be honest, there's really no way to future proof because technology changes every day. But in this term, when I went in there, I set the expectation. You, like Matt said, you can just go in there and buy what you need to just get by, or like right now they have 2 cameras from us that they're not even using it that they purchased because that's for next year. As you mentioned, sports, they want to start recording their basketball, volleyball, baseball, football games, having students do it. Well, they have to learn from the ground up, right? So we work with them, get them, understanding how the cameras work, so then next year they can go in as a little bit older kids, set it up, be able to set it up and be ready to do it. So setting that expectation, being able to tell the story as to why they want to spend that extra money to get this goes a long way. It's not a sales pitch. It's basically telling them, like, if you just spend the bare minimum, you're going to be obsolete next year.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it is. That's not an upsell. That's just reality. But if you spend, as Matt said, you spend a little bit of money for, a good network, a good computer, good cameras, you're going to be going for quite some time. And that's the expectation that needs to be set.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll just piggyback on that a little bit and saying, in these discussions you have with them, a lot of the times these people do have a time frame of how long they expect that equipment to do what they need. So, you might come to find that, yeah, it's a 5-year life cycle they're really looking for, at which point maybe don't go and spend the money for the bleeding edge computer and the bleeding edge network equipment, because that equipment you need is going to get less expensive in 5 years. And that what you can buy today for a decent amount does everything you need. Just know you might be locking yourself into not really being able to upgrade things.
Mm. Excellent points, to be perfectly honest. And Stephen, I think you said it right. We can future proof, but I forget the name. There's a term for how quickly technology advances effectively. It's the something rule or law. But basically, yeah, technology is always going to advance. It's never going to be perfectly future proof. But yeah, build for a couple years out, and that'll at least save you some potential investment. But speaking to going back a little bit to network, and Matt, you mentioned this in the discussion as well. Talking to the IT administrators at a school who might not be familiar with quote unquote pro AV or broadcast or video systems. When you're talking about introducing a PoE network or a new network switch or AV over IP, What's kind of a good approach when you talk to IT professionals about things like security and power management and data management? Because sometimes they might just, be overwhelmed with it because they might just not be that knowledgeable.
I think the easiest way to approach that, um, there are very few schools where they do not have network video security systems in place already. So that being said, they're already doing a lot of this stuff on their networks, whether they know it or not, from a security standpoint, from a handling IP video standpoint, segregating traffic. So a lot of the times I find the easiest discussion is to ask if they have a video security system. And you can kind of use that to say, well, really, you're already doing this. Let's talk about how you can leverage everything you've learned there and apply it to these production needs that you have going on. Beyond that, it's really just helping them understand how the technology is going to interact on their network. And one of the biggest things they want to know is how much bandwidth is it going to eat up? How much is it potentially going to interfere with what the kids need to do in the lab or on the second floor? Um, so really, I think it's just starting that conversation, knowing that there are multiple ways to get these signals out. There's ways to make them mobile. If you can't get the IT department to play nice, there are ways of making this work still. But if you can leverage an existing network, it gives you a lot of flexibility. So just try and be nice and patient with the IT manager as they're usually fielding a unreasonable amount of requests. So just try and make best use of their time and not sit there sending a question, following up the next day with another question. Try and collect everything ahead of time. Have your 10 questions ready and send them all at once.
Perfect. Gentlemen, I kind of think again, we could go down so many of these rabbit holes in talking about education. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it, right? Again, sports, graduations, live events, classroom, distance learning, recording, IT management. I mean, it covers the gamut. But I think that was a great, we'll call it scratching the surface of getting into the EDU world. Another thing, and again, I'm just going to circle back, is knowing your product set, knowing the tools that you have available to yourself, right? So if you're well educated on the solutions that we have or other providers have, you can go into a school system like this because it's going to be a lot of discovery. As Matt and Steven have mentioned, it's all about finding out what they really need. If it's a podcast studio, we could use a Z-Cam for that. If it's a graduation, it's a multicam. Having these systems built ahead of time, in your head at least, is going to be advantageous and help 1,000 times moreover. We'll probably tackle similar topics coming up in other tech town halls as we dive deeper into these forms of technology. Again, it is summer season, so we're going to be talking probably a little bit more about live events and things like that moving into the end of the year, and all kind of facets of Pro AV, live broadcasting, and all the technologies surrounding that here with PTZ Optics and HuddleCam HD. I want to thank everyone again for coming and viewing all the content that we produce here at PTZ Optics and HuddleCam. Do us a favor. If you like what you see, subscribe, hit the notification button. It does help you to be involved in the conversation. Again, going back to staying educated as you go out into the world to talk to your clients. This is a great place to do that. Just start here, be involved, ask us questions. We are more than happy to help you out. Check out ptzoptics.com as well as huddlecamhd.com. My name is William Goldie, thanking Steven and Matt Davis for joining us again today. And that wraps up our latest edition of the Tech Town Hall. We'll see you out there in the education spaces.